Morning, afternoon, speaker. This is Delegate Otto Stowe. I'm on the line. Go on mute.
Hello? Speaker. Good afternoon. Speaker, this is Delegate again. Hello?
We can hear you, Honorable Begay.
Oh, okay. What's going on now?
We're just still waiting to get more delegates on the line.
Oh, okay. We're just not starting?
Yeah, we haven't started yet.
Okay, all right. I'm on another phone too, so but I'll switch back and forth. Thank you.
This is Delegate Charles Newman. I'm on the line.
Delegate Daniel So on the call. Has the meeting started?
We are running with the meeting, Mr. So, good to hear you, Mr. We're just waiting.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being on the call. Chairman Daniel So, we are going to start the meeting right now. Good afternoon, Honorable Otto So. Good afternoon, colleagues, member of the 24th Navajo Nation Council, Naabik'íyáti Committee. We're running live and recording as we speak. So let's go ahead and get this Naabik'íyáti Committee of the 24th Navajo Nation Council work session going via telecommunications. I'm here in Window Rock, Arizona on the Navajo Nation. I have my colleagues throughout the Navajo Nation calling in via telecommunications. Thank you very much, colleagues, for being on the line. Today's date is Monday, May 17th, 2021. Time now is 2:06 p.m. With that, so we have a work session agenda that was posted more than 24 hours in advance. We'll go ahead and read off that work agenda or that work session agenda to go ahead and continue to get us started here on today's proceedings. So presiding is myself, Seth Damon, Speaker of 24th Navajo Nation Council. And we have item number 1 on here is call a work session order, then roll call, then invocation. With that, colleagues, is let's go ahead and at this time, I did call the meeting to order at 2:06 p.m. Let's go ahead and get a roll call.
Good afternoon, delegates. I will begin roll call with Elmer Begay. Honorable Elmer
I'm here.
Begay.
This is Delegate Begay.
Honorable Elmer Begay has answered a roll call. Honorable Key Allen Begay Jr. Honorable Key Allen Begay Jr. Honorable Key Allen Begay Jr. has not answered a roll call. Honorable Paul Begay. Honorable Paul Begay. Honorable Paul Begay has not answered roll call. One moment. Honorable Nathaniel Brown.
Delegate Brown is present. Yeah.
Honorable Nathaniel Brown has answered roll call. Honorable Eugenia Charles Newton.
Charles Newton is present.
Honorable Eugenia Charles Newton has answered roll call. Honorable Amber Kanaz-Bakrati. Honorable Amber Kanaz-Bakrati. Honorable Amber Kanaz-Bakrati has not answered roll call. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. has not answered roll call. Honorable Mark Freeland. Honorable Mark Freeland.
Yate, Teskada.
Honorable Mark Freeland has answered roll call. Honorable Pernell Halona. Honorable Pernell Halona. Honorable Pernell Halona has not answered roll call. Honorable Jamie Henio. Honorable Jamie Henio. Honorable Jamie Henio has not answered roll call. Honorable Vince James.
Delegate James present. Thank you.
Honorable Vince James has answered roll call. Honorable Rick Nez.
Delegate Rick Nez is present. Yate.
Honorable Rick Nez has answered roll call. Honorable Carl Slater. Honorable Carl Slater.
Present, Delegate Slater.
Honorable Carl Slater has answered roll call. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. has not answered roll call. Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr.
Present.
Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr. has answered roll call. Honorable Charlene So. Honorable Charlene So. Honorable Charlene So has not answered roll call. Honorable Daniel So.
I'm here.
Honorable Daniel So has answered roll call. Honorable Eugene So. Honorable Eugene So. Honorable Eugene So has not answered roll call. Honorable Odo So.
I am present.
Honorable Odo So has answered roll call. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr.
I'm present.
Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. has answered roll call. Honorable Edison Juanita.
Here.
Honorable Edison Juanita has answered roll call. Honorable Edmund Yazzie. Honorable Edmund Yazzie. Honorable Edmund Yazzie has not answered roll call. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair has not answered roll call. Going back up. Starting off with Honorable Speaker Damon.
Present.
Honorable Speaker Damon has answered roll call. Honorable Kealan Brigade Jr. Honorable Kealan Brigade Jr. Honorable Kealan Brigade Jr. has not answered roll call. Honorable Paul Brigade.
Delegate Paul Begay is present.
Honorable Paul Brigade has answered roll call. Honorable Amber Kanaz-Bakrati. Honorable Amber Kanaz-Bakrati. Honorable Amber Kanaz-Bakrati has not answered roll call. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. has not answered roll call. Honorable Pernell Halona. Honorable Pernell Halona. Honorable Pernell Halona has not answered roll call. Honorable Jamie Henio. Honorable Jamie Henio. Honorable Jamie Henio has not answered roll call. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. has not answered roll call. Honorable Charlene So. Honorable Charlene So. Honorable Charlene So has not answered roll call. Honorable Eugene So.
Motion
Honorable Eugene So.
sir. Oh,
Honorable Eugene So has answered roll call. Honorable Edison Juanita. Honorable Edison Juanita. Honorable Edison Juanita has not answered roll call.
I'm here.
Honorable, oh, excuse me, Honorable Edison Juanita has answered roll call. Honorable Edmund Yazzie. Honorable Edmund Yazzie. Honorable Edmund Yazzie has not answered roll call. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair has not answered roll call. With that, Honorable Speaker Damon, 15 delegates have answered roll call and 9 have not answered roll call.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, colleagues, for being here with us. All the colleagues on listening in. I know that there's other colleagues that have attending other meetings at this time. So colleagues, with that, I know in moving forward, Let me go ahead and move on down. I know that there might have been some invocations this morning, but just to start us on a new path moving forward here at this committee level and Naabik'íyáti committee, I'll go ahead and ask Honorable Otto So to see if he can do invocation this morning or actually this afternoon for us. Honorable Otto So, you mind doing that?
Oh, yeah. I'm honored to provide invocation for the committee for this afternoon. Adonda hado o dahdo zeto yashin tsago hanne yego kasi ke bakai tane ko chat ahdo berna chi ajo ba chi ini do chon in lini e bikadi e akon le Washington no hat aha ade ha o tri ole ko kitna in lini ade tashin sofa chon in lini pa bikadi e ko ota on chigan chepe dahdo this month 그때 그정도 원래 다 하고 일체됐나요? 일산됐나? 서야시 아야쇼 아야쇼 الغالي 또 그도 نهو كا ناغي نهو كه ناغي أتاهيس آجي ناسان بكا بدأ جين نهو كا جتناني ليا جبه نهو كه تنائه هوني ليا إن كادة إيه تيجي إيه إن كادة إيه كأن لين بسني ليا كيات إيه كيه ناقص ذيه كيه أجوب بقى وينسن كهو دي جبه هوني به جان دولي شدنا شكيو أخليني شاكيت كادي به نيجي ده جان دو أنا شدوا أيوة كاش نكادي به نيجي كن لين به أصلا الناجين نيجي إيدو نهو تصود نكادي يا عادي نكيه تيني يا يا تيجي نيجي شو إيدو جونا إنه تخاب نكادي عادي يا تيه به من خان ساكي سولي أن لين به تهوجون شيء هاتشيت شيء أو هاتشيوان هاتشيت إنه فيه كم نكادي بين هيك تهوجون كان لين به يا تيه هو به ناس يتاشون ناس كشكي ناس سويت بكدوشو كان لين هو به أجوني هجي نهتيس لين به نتيس نهتيس بتخافت زيد ولا هنشيا يتان هذا كدو خالدين إنت أني تيس خالدين شكي كوتشيني إيه هو الجشو به بالناشئ أتهاجن كوه تهيس آغو به آستون هو كنا غيبه نهاهو سيدو كناهو سيدو باب الناشئ جين عشان الزني هو يتاهي نتجوجون دول سان كده وجون دول نهيا بدون كده دون هذا ناديت آسو خهوجون دول نهذا خهوجون دول سان ما تهس آغو تهديه ده نوعي دنيتلين يجد دنيتلين سو دنيتلين ديجي نيتلين أشا كوني نيتاهي نهو كهكا نيتاهي نشاهو نسن يلتي نتيكه نهجي يلوسي بك أهو آدون داني تريس in the car that's short and the cabin. Having that constant is cut later. But the high zone con to yard is con. The other skill on some the cut you quite. Niche need ya. Tonelia. Cornelia. I don't have that easy. I told about Nelia. That is strange if I see it now. But here's me. It's strange to come, my luck. The last line is clean. I have not to come. No card in the end and the non hinge. Even the card is for but ego. Ninja chose it in. So hard that you that I need either. O could nan lean come. So even me. The card that's the nan come. Yeah, either yes, not that the dog can't even I would our coaching it. Maybe not this thing, a call. This thing, to sort of the lad of it. But in card, but I shouldn't snuggle. Next time, I in that or clay. Next year, in that or clay. Cost the skill. 86. You can't kick eat, eat, and they okay, eat the best. Gallons, it is what I just see. Even as it is strange, was you not sleep on it now? No, son. Wasn't the hot dog click? Was you not sleep? Was you not sleep? Was you not sleep? Was you not sleep? Thank you very much, Speaker. Go on mute.
Thank you very much, Honorable Otto So, for that invocation. And thank you very much again to my colleagues and everybody for listening in this afternoon. And thank you very much to our presenters and their tasks that they were entitled to come back a week ago to the day. So looks like we will have a good discussion from them as well. So good afternoon to our executive branch, Mr. President, Vice President, also to Madam Chief Justice on the judicial side and all the staff members from the whole entire Navajo Nation. Thank you, everyone that's listening in. Thank you very much for being on the line. At this time, we'll go to recognizing guests and visiting officials. Before we do that, I just really like to thank colleagues to be this excuse on Friday, but most importantly, thank you to Chairman Nez for facilitating the meeting. I really appreciate that. And it looks like we still have a lot of work ahead of us, and we're continuing to work on that effort. So here at the Speaker's office today, tomorrow, and for the rest of the week, so we can go ahead and get proper things in line. And looks like we'll have a meeting tomorrow morning, colleagues, on an update. So with that, colleagues, right now, are there any recognizing guests and visiting officials? If there are none, let's go ahead and continue on down, colleagues. Again, we are here on our work sessions, continuing the dialogue of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. And last week, Monday, we had an update status from not only on the ARPA funds and their current, status there with the Treasury and with the Washington, D.C. White House, and other areas there within the federal government. What we can do is move forward and go ahead and continue back on that. If you remember, colleagues, we did ask them that it was, we did send out that information that we wanted to go ahead and, because they just got new information last Monday, we wanted them to go ahead and decipher through that information, look through that information, and give us a formal rundown on what we think is the best possible now the representation, but more so these updates are coming through. So with that, colleagues, let me go ahead and move on down and make that a priority now. As we know, the status update of these ARPA funds is going to be presented by Holland and Knight, Mr. Honorable former Senator Carla Begay, Santee Lewis. And then that time we can go into questions and answers. So, colleagues, let me go ahead and move on down and move forth. And I know that Holland and I did send out a notice about 5 minutes ago, a presentation to members of the Naabik'íyáti committee. I hope everyone has received that. That information is confidential per the Department of Justice. So I don't know if we'll be presenting that, Mr. Rico, on the big screen this afternoon, but that information will be divulged here. So maybe Holland and I could give us a more better explanation. Holland and I, as of right now, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Speaker Damon and esteemed members of the Navajo Nation leadership. And thank you again for having us back. It was a week ago, you're correct, that we were starting our presentation. And then as we were doing it, the Treasury Department was issuing guidance literally as we were giving our presentation. The presentation that has been mailed out to you, Speaker Damon, I'm happy to present it on the screen or refer to Madam AG as to her preference, whichever works best for those on the line and on the computer.
Mr. Speaker, this is Mel Rodas. Mr. Speaker.
Yes, sorry, Mel. Yes.
Oh, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mel.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker and honorable delegates and other dignitaries on the line. I did say that presentation was confidential, but what I meant by that was that I was respectfully requesting for the recipients not to forward it. But I do think that it's appropriate to share it on the screen now with your permission, sir. Thank you. And I also wanted to point out, Mr. Speaker, that Madam Attorney General and Madam Deputy AG are also on the line if there are questions afterwards. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mel. Thank you for being here with us too this afternoon. So with that, any further information, we can go back to Holland and Knight.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I think it would be appropriate for Ms. Elliott and Mr. Parsons to share their screen. Thank you, sir.
Okay, all right. And then Mel, are you going to do an intro then and then go back to Holland and Knight, or what do we?
We are prepared, Speaker Damon, to just start with this presentation here, as you can see it now shared on your screen.
Okay, all right, then go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So today we're here to talk to you about the Fiscal Recovery Fund in the American Rescue Plan. As we have presented to Council before, the American Rescue Plan was a very significant, large law with lots of money allocated to tribes in various places, for example, through BIA, through BIE. But today here, we're just talking about the Fiscal Recovery Fund and the recent guidance from the U.S. Department of Treasury. We have spoke to you last week. I'm Nicole Elliott from the Holland and Knight Native American Law Team. I'm joined with Ken Parsons. We're going to go back and forth and share the screen and give you the presentation today. And we're really available to answer any questions you may have about the Fiscal Recovery Fund, and in particular, the announcements that were made a week ago. We're going to talk about two big subjects here today, and of course, take your questions. But what was noteworthy about last week is two things really. First is Treasury announced how it's going to allocate the $20 billion in Fiscal Recovery Fund among tribes. And so we're going to talk about that today. And second, we're going to talk about the eligible uses, not only those that were indicated in the law itself, but how Treasury interpreted those and announced that last Monday. We're going to provide some, observations that we have, in particular, as we know the Navajo Nation would like to spend fiscal recovery funds, in particular around infrastructure. And then just to give some perspective, we're going to do a really quick compare of the fiscal recovery funds, this $20 billion that is allocated to tribes, as compared to the CARES Act funds or the CRF, because they are different in terms of their uses and their allocation and otherwise. So again, the American Rescue Plan was $20 billion to tribes in fiscal recovery funds. $1 billion in the law said had to be allocated equally among all of the federally recognized tribes. And then Treasury was allowed to come up with an allocation formula on how to allocate the remaining $19 billion. And Ken is going to go through how that was, what Treasury decided with respect to that $19 billion. Also, in addition to announcing the allocation formula last week, they also interpreted the statute for us. So they gave us additional guidance about what the statute means and what would be eligible uses for this money. And they also gave us some deadlines that we'll cover as well. And give you some highlights of the tribal consultation that has already happened and will happen tomorrow on May 18th. Ken, let's first talk about the allocation and how Treasury decided to allocate the $19 billion.
Great, thanks. So we've known for a while now that $20 billion were going to tribes and fiscal recovery funds, and that $19 billion of that would be allocated based on a formula that Treasury comes up with. The other $1 billion is going to go equally to all federally recognized tribes. So we've been wondering about this $19 billion and how is Treasury going to allocate that? They held consultations on it, accepted tribal comments. And as Nicole was mentioning, literally last week while we were on the call with you, showing you a different set of slides, Treasury released its allocation formula. And it's going to allocate the $19 billion, 65% based on enrollment and 35% based on employment. So we've got a population piece and an employment piece. It's pretty similar to how Treasury did the coronavirus relief funds last year. If you recall, that was done 60% based on population, 30% based on employment, and then there was a 10% business expenditure piece that isn't present this time around. The other significant difference this time around is that Treasury is using self-certified tribal enrollment data. Last time around, Treasury used the housing data from HUD. So the other interesting thing about this process to come up with the allocation is that Treasury already has the numbers it needs in both instances, because in April, Treasury asked for some information from tribes, the Bureau of Indian Affairs asked for some information from tribes, which included enrollment data. And last year, with respect to the coronavirus relief funds, Treasury had asked for some employment data. And the key year for the employment data is 2019, both for coronavirus relief funds and fiscal recovery funds. So Treasury thought that looking at the year pre-pandemic was the most important year. And we'll see that theme in other places as well. But for now, the two main things to note are we've got an employment allocation and an enrollment allocation, and we're going to be seeing the funds pretty soon. We can move on to the next slide, but I just wanted to point out a couple of things that Treasury did not put into the formula that some tribes commented on. One was a land share component. Treasury decided not to include that. And another one is some tribes are advocating for putting a cap on allocations, like saying that tribes could only receive a certain amount. Treasury also decided against that. So some important deadlines here. Treasury is going to release the FRF, Fiscal Recovery Funds, in two pieces. The first one's going to be this enrollment allocation. And it's not just going to be the population, it's also going to be the tribe's share of the $1 billion that all the federally recognized tribes are getting. And that is going to be coming later this month. The deadline to request the funding for this is May 24th, so next week. And that should be coming out pretty soon, because that's not when the payment's necessarily going to be made. Once the tribe goes in and requests its payment, again, the data is already there, the enrollment data Treasury already has. So it's really just a matter of asking for the money. And then Treasury goes through some kind of a confirmation process, make sure the information is correct. And then it sends the money, and might take a few days for the transfer to happen. So tribes should be looking for this allocation coming very, very soon. The second allocation is going to come in June. And this is the enrollment allocation, the employment allocation. And the deadline for tribes to confirm the employment numbers is June 7th. So we won't see the second payment until after that date, I think. And also it is a deadline if tribes don't go into the system and confirm their employment numbers by June 7th. Treasury has been very clear that tribes will not get the second payment. So both dates are very important both deadlines are very important to meet. Moving on to the next slide, just wanted to give you an overview. So last Monday we were on this conference and had the slides, and Treasury drops a bunch of guidance, not just the allocation formula I just mentioned to you, but just a whole host of other documents. And on this slide, I'm just going to give you an overview of what came out last Monday, and probably more will come over time, but just to give you kind of an overview. So the first document was the methodology that I just described. So you can go and read about the exact words from Treasury, how they established this methodology and their reasoning for it. There's also a checklist, which includes step-by-step instructions for tribes to obtain the funding. And there's a Deal Tribal Leader letter that summarizes all the documents that were released. So these are the tribal specific documents. There are also some general documents that apply in addition to tribes, state and local governments as well. So the big one is the interim final rule. This is a 151-page guidance on eligible uses of FRF. I've read it, Nicole's read it. It's really long, detailed, but it's an important document because it's what we're going to be going back to whenever we get questions about, well, can we do this or that with FRF? That's going to be the big piece of guidance. Now it says interim final rule. So Treasury is accepting comments on this document for the next 60 days. So I think until late July, we can comment and ask questions. And speaking of questions, one of the other documents that was released on Monday was a frequently asked questions document. It had 60 FAQs, and Treasury on one of the consultations said that they plan to update this document frequently. So we're going to be dealing with a lot of guidance this year, it seems like. There's also a fact sheet and a quick reference guide. Both of these provide a really quick overview of all the documents that were released in case you're not inclined to read the interim final rule. But if you are wanting to look at any of these documents, we put the link down below where you can find it. There's a specific link that you can cut and paste. You can also Google like state and local COVID-19 Treasury, and it has that page. I say state and local because the FRF applies not just to tribes, but state and local as well. So moving on.
So as we think about, and most of this presentation is now going to focus on what did Treasury say about what's an eligible use? And we care about what's an eligible use for these funds because the consequence, if we use it for a use that's not eligible, is that Treasury can demand that money back. So we want to make sure that however we're spending FRF, it's done consistent with what Treasury has said is an okay use. We start to figure out what is an eligible use or permissible use of FRF by looking at the law itself. So this is what Treasury is interpreting in the interim final rule. And as I think we started to talk about last week is that The FRF statute is much more broad than the Coronavirus Relief Fund, the CARES Act money. And that's because it includes not only the public health emergency costs, but also dealing with the negative economic impacts that happened as a result of the COVID pandemic. The law talks about performing essential work to respond to workers. And it also, which was a huge criticism of CARES Act money, allows tribes to use this money to reflect a reduction in revenue. And it allows the tribe, and we'll go into a lot greater detail, but number 3 is probably by law the broadest category of eligible uses. And again, it allows the tribe to think about what did it lose in revenues as a result of the pandemic. And the 4th statutory use, the use that's labeled that you can find in the law, is about making necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband. So this is kind of our starting point, and this is what Treasury was interpreting for us in the interim final rule and the other documents that it issued last week. As Ken and I have read this document multiple times probably, there are a couple key takeaways that we come across and wanted to express to you all. The first is that I think we were very happy with how Treasury interpreted what is an eligible use of FRF. They seem to be very flexible, respectful of tribal sovereignty, and expressly note the disproportionate impact the COVID pandemic has had on tribes. We talked that and uses words like flexibility and broad throughout the guidance. So that was very welcome in our minds. The second thing that we noted right away is that, the funds had to be, the statute says that they have to be incurred by 2024. And with the CARES Act, Treasury interpreted that really pretty narrowly. So we were also very pleased to see that in this guidance, Treasury says you have to have the funds obligated by the end of 2024, but you have an additional 2 years to expend them. So some additional, again, in the theme of flexibility and broad guidance, we were happy to see the additional time that folks were given to spend the FRF. The other important thing to note is that they did say that this is really about prospective costs. So with one exception that Ken's going to talk about in a minute, it's going forward, it's forward-looking spending. So the date that they give is March 3rd, 2021. And it's all about prospective costs. It doesn't go back in time. And then I think the third and fourth kind of, this is the 4th highlight of the guidance, is that they do, like the statute does, say that the infrastructure must be water, sewer, and broadband. And that's the infrastructure that the law contemplated. However, as I discussed a minute ago, there is also a category about revenue loss. And if there is a revenue loss, you can use that for government services. And that's, I think, where we think there's broad flexibility to the extent that the Navajo Nation experienced revenue loss, which it inevitably did, can use the funds for government services. And that would include a pretty broad range of projects, including infrastructure projects. So Ken's going to walk through kind of the 4 statutory eligible uses and what Treasury said about those 4.
Yeah, so just before I get into it, just taking a step back, a couple of things I wanted to mention. Number one, as we mentioned on the previous slide, it's very flexible here. The guidance isn't perfect. I think, as you'll see, there are some things that we don't like about it, but in general, it's a lot more flexible than the CRF guidance was. The other thing I wanted to mention, with the interim rule being 151 pages, it's hard to condense it down on a slide. And so keep in mind that there's more than that's on the slide, but then beyond that, the interim rule for all of these categories says that they're not exhaustive lists. So the examples I give you of the different types of acceptable expenditures, with the exception of the infrastructure that's defined in the statute, there's going to be more, probably more in the rule itself, plus the government itself, the tribal government can come up with more as well that fits the kind of theme of the category. So the first category is very similar to what was in the coronavirus relief fund. We've talked about how CARES Act was really about relief from COVID-19, whereas the fiscal recovery fund is more about recovering from it, not just the health impacts or the economic impacts. This first category captures both of those here. So it's responding to the impacts of COVID-19, health-related or economic. We could assist workers and families, unemployed workers, assistance to households facing food, housing, or financial insecurity. We can support small businesses like tourism, small businesses that are doing that have been really impacted, like hospitality, that have been impacted by COVID-19. And the idea of this is to speed up the recovery from the pandemic. Now, in addition to these broad categories that tribes can use the fiscal recovery funds for specifically responding to the public health emergency, Treasury is going to presume certain additional activities that address health disparities are eligible uses when provided by tribal governments. So not everybody can utilize these categories. There's another subset that can, but in general, this category is just for tribes, and it's any tribe. You don't have to prove anything. So these are funding for community health workers, investing in housing in neighborhoods, and also addressing educational disparities and promoting healthy childhood environments. So these are pretty broad categories that are really tribal specific that can fit into this category of fiscal recovery funds. Moving on to the next one. This is premium pay for essential workers. And if you recall from the statute that we've discussed before, this is one that was kind of defined in the statute of what an eligible worker was and what the premium pay was. It was that $13 an hour up to additional $25,000. So the interim final rule that Treasury came out with is actually a little broader than that in some respect and kind of head scratching in other ways. So I'll get into that a little bit. So we know that premium pay can be used for these essential workers. And Treasury's guidance now tells us who these people are. It's staff at nursing homes, hospitals, home care settings, public health and safety staff. That would include like sanitation workers, for example, child care workers and educators, social services, and human services staff. So all of these people are encompassed in what Treasury is calling essential workers that are eligible for the premium pay. Treasury has also said that if you're going to increase premium pay over 150% of the average state or county annual rate wage, you need specific justification. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means it has to be justified. And to be clear, it's 150% of all jobs in the area, not the specific job that that person does. Another interesting thing about this category is, although as Nicole mentioned, most of FRF Treasury has decided has to be spent only for costs incurred now or going forward, not in the past. Treasury has been very clear that premium pay can actually be retroactive. And in fact, Treasury is encouraging retroactive pay for staff that has really been working hard to deal with COVID-19 and hasn't really seen any sort of bonus pay. So that can go back to last year to give these workers some premium payments. But Treasury interestingly came up with the idea that workers need to be physically present to qualify for this. So they actually stay in the guidance that if you're telecommuting from your residence, you don't qualify. And I think some workers do a mix of both, so it's unclear how you would do that right now. But they want you to be physically present or physically handling things related to COVID. So that's what they came up with, and it's not really in the statute, but it's an interesting take on what they came up with here. On the next slide, Nicole mentioned this as well. It's the lost revenue and government services category, and this is the big one. Because basically, if something doesn't really fit in one of the other categories, it often can be put into this category, because what's a government service? What would a tribe be doing but for providing government services to its people in the form of infrastructure improvements or other services? So Tribes can use fiscal recovery funds to provide these government services, but it has to be to the extent of what's called lost revenue. And Treasury has a specific calculation on how that's defined. And basically it looks at the last pre-pandemic year, 2019. So it says, how did you do in that year? And how did you do in 2020? And it's not just 2020 versus 2019. Treasury also assumes a growth. So they're trying to establish how would you have done as a tribe in 2020 or 2021 if we hadn't have had a pandemic. So did you anticipate growing? Everybody anticipates growth from year to year, and you can actually assume a 4.1% growth rate at a minimum from year to year. So to the extent that you've lost revenue because of the pandemic, including anticipated growth in your revenue, you can use that amount to provide government services. So we're looking at this as really as a catch-all category, that you want to do some sort of infrastructure that isn't covered specifically by the infrastructure category of FRF. Maybe it can be a government service. And that's why the very last point here is once you've identified that number, you've got real broad latitude to support government services. And Treasury has been very clear that they interpret this category very, very flexibly. So another point about this is it assumes that your revenue loss is due to COVID. So it doesn't matter if there were other reasons the revenue declined, it just takes a blanket assumption that revenue declined due to COVID. So the last category that you can use FRF for is infrastructure. And when we alluded to it a few times in our presentation, the statute itself talks about water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. And I think a lot of us had questions, are other types of infrastructure included? Treasury felt constrained by the statute and only has said that you can use water, sewer, and broadband under this particular category. Within the categories, they've been pretty broad, that it can be water, projects that address climate change, for example. You can assist households to support internet access. So you can do a lot within the categories, but it really is limited to sewer, water, or broadband. And Treasury specifically says in its guidance that general infrastructure spending, roads, energy, et cetera, are not allowed in this category, but as we pointed out, they might be allowed in another category of FRF spending.
So that covers the eligible uses as defined by statute and then further clarified by Treasury, again, in an interim final rule that they're soliciting comments on and that will be finalized. I think Ken and I both expect the final rule to largely be in line with interim final rule and not really throw a lot of surprises in there, but it is interim final for your awareness. With all of these eligible uses, understandably, but unfortunately, Treasury is going to require reporting from recipients. The two reports that the interim final rule focuses on is something called an interim report, and that will be due for the first time in July, so pretty soon, of how you're spending this money. And then it anticipates quarterly project and expenditure reports. So every quarter, basically, the tribe will have to report significant data into the U.S. Department of Treasury. And that's the main mechanism by which Treasury is going to make sure that tribes and state and locals are spending this money for eligible expenditures. I also included a plus more in there in this slide deck because throughout the interim rule, there are specialty reports contemplated. So for example, if you're doing something on tourism, Treasury has hinted that it will want additional reports, or if you're doing infrastructure, it will want additional details. So all of this slide is to make sure as expenditures are being made, that tracking will really become key and being able to meet these requirements of all of the reporting. The issue of, I also wanted to mention the issue of subrecipients. So Treasury does contemplate that recipients, which would be the tribe, provide money to subrecipients. But the rule makes very clear that the recipient, the tribe, ultimately is responsible for all of this reporting and is ultimately responsible that these funds are spent properly. even if they are given on grants or otherwise to sub-recipients. So additional, just further observations to quickly wrap up, and then we will be happy to take questions. Obviously, the flexibility that Treasury gave us in this interim final rule is very welcome. It feels very different from the CARES Act money. And we have additional time to think about our priorities and think about how to spend this money. The loss revenue calculation for government services, that bucket, that criteria, that category is super important to calculate, because once that revenue is calculated, the tribe will have a lot of flexibility on how it uses it as the catch-all sort of category. It's unclear what Treasury will do with existing CRF guidance and whether they, now we kind of have two sets of rules, and that could still govern the CARES Act CRF money. And unfortunately, Treasury did say that it will continue to update FAQs. So last year, one of the challenges, in addition to having to spend the money on a very quick timeline, was that Treasury would get a question and decide to answer it in a published FAQ on their website. And so it caused a lot of issues with clients because we had to continually make sure that whatever we were deciding, we had the most relevant guidance from Treasury Department. And that will be an issue here. So it will be important to monitor not only as this interim final rule gets finalized, but also any additional FAQs where Treasury gives us guidance on how these funds can be used. Again, like CRF, there is an inspector general, there is reporting, and the interim final rule, in fact, contemplates this issue of a recipient uses it in a way that Treasury takes issue with, and contemplates a process where there will be an appeal sort of process of was this spent correctly, was it not? And again, ultimately, Treasury has the authority to recall money that was not spent in alignment with the eligible uses. And as Ken mentioned earlier, Treasury is accepting comments on the interim final rule. So this is just our last slide, and it compares the coronavirus relief funds through the CARES Act through FRF. Obviously, one of the bigger differences is that this is a much bigger allocation to tribes, and therefore the Navajo Nation will be expecting much more in funds from the CARES Act. The allocation formula for both of those, Treasury had authority on both of those to figure out how to allocate it, and they're similar, but some differences in their allocation method. Another big significance is the time frame by which these funds have to be spent. We were all rushing to spend the coronavirus relief funds, even though there was an extension by Congress. It was a serious workforce struggle to make sure we were spending money correctly and in time. Here, Treasury has interpreted FRF to be obligated by the end of 2024 and expended by the end of 2026. So this again is much welcome in terms of relief and how we prioritize this. And then the uses are different. Congress was much more broad, and Treasury again interpreted the law in a very broad way. And of course, on both, if you spend them, if you don't spend them by that deadline, or if you spend them for uses that Treasury determines are ineligible, you will have to repay those monies back to the Treasury Department. So that's just a quick overview of what we learned as we were talking to you last week in terms of how these funds will be allocated and what are some eligible uses for these funds. And with that, Speaker Damon, we're happy to take questions or defer to you how best to proceed.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Speaker Damon, I can hear you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you very much for presenting before the Naabik'íyáti committee this afternoon. With that, colleagues, before we go on to the next president, or before we go and answer questions, let me go on down to anything else that is pressing that maybe Ms. Santee Lewis or Mr. Carlisle Begay can add on, and then we can go back for further questions and recommendations. So with that, let me go on to Mr. Carlisle Begay. Mr. Begay, I didn't know if you had anything else to add on after what further information that Holland and Knight has presented before us today.
Yes, good afternoon, Chairman Seth Damon, Chairman of the NABI Committee, and honorable members of the 24th Navajo Nation Council staff and advisors on the line here today. My name is Carlisle Begay. I assist the Office of the Speaker with federal and state legislative and governmental affairs. By formal introduction, She Carlisle Begay, and she Naabik'íyáti a Bashuchin. Mr. Chairman, thank you for having me here again today, and as a request from your office to do a follow-up report from our report last week, just a couple points that I think are important to add on to the report by Holland and Knight. To the honorable members of council, I think that as outlined in the previous report, the tribal enrollment data, which will be, it's due by next Monday, the 24th. As outlined, the Treasury will use self-certified enrollment numbers provided by tribes. In April of this year, the Bureau of Indian Affairs did collect our enrollment numbers from tribal governments around the country. And I would just suggest to our honorable members here today to verify with the Office of the President and Vice President that we ensure that our updated Navajo Nation enrollment numbers reflect the increase of our total enrolled population of the Navajo Nation, which I understand increased from 306,268 to 399,494. So I just would make a recommendation that we follow up with the Office of the President and Vice President that those enrollment numbers are updated. Secondly, Treasury did acknowledge that there was a lot of trouble from folks calling in to their informational session last week. They are scheduled to host another informational session tomorrow, Tuesday, May 18th at 1 p.m. Navajo time or 3 p.m. Eastern. The Treasury Department will be providing additional information and overview of the program, review all the relevant material that they released last week as well. Next, I would also emphasize that although the focus currently is on the $20 billion allocation, not to lose sight of the totality of the $31 billion that was allocated in other sections of the American Rescue Plan Act. As an example, as we reported last week, under the housing provisions, Navajo Housing Authority did receive, as I mentioned, 49.7. The Bureau of Indian Education has also announced their award for all of our 68 BIE schools. We will receive approximately $171 million combined, in addition to some money for Denton College and NTU. Next, I would just as a reminder as well, I mentioned last week that we should also consider reaching out to our external partners at the state level, and specifically of the $360 billion that will be allocated by Treasury. The state of New Mexico is estimated to receive about $2.456 billion. Utah is set to receive about $2.74 billion, and the state of Arizona alone will receive approximately $7.63 billion. And there may be opportunities for allowable partnerships. For example, broadband has been a big focus of our leadership. The state of Arizona is investing in some broadband infrastructure currently, and will use some of the ARPA money for broadband. And as we are continuing to discuss broadband, those our opportunities for collaboration. Finally, one other important area our leadership should closely consult with the Treasury Department for is Section 605 of the state and local section of the American Rescue Plan Act. There was language added in Section 605 in creating the Local Assistance and Tribal Consistency Fund. What this did is it allocated or authorized $500 million in this particular section destined for specifically tribes. And it allocates funding for each fiscal year 2022 and fiscal year 2023. And the Secretary of Treasury is set to reserve about $250 million of the total amount under that subsection to allocate to eligible tribal governments. And what's interesting about this section of the bill, which again, we're focused entirely on the $20 billion. This is a separate section that the Treasury Department is also going to be consulting with tribes on. And it's important to participate in those discussions. This new section, again, would establish a new tribal economic stabilization fund, which would allow the Department of Treasury to make payments eligible to tribal governments. The language as defined in statute was intended to be focused on repairing critical drinking water infrastructure to fund tribal healthcare services and other critical tribal needs. As a brief background on how this particular section came about, as the American Rescue Plan Act was being negotiated, specifically Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, and Senator Mike Crapo, Republican from Idaho, during negotiations of ARPA, wanted to give money to the respective states in Oregon and Idaho for their declining revenue from the timber industries. And the Chairman Manchin and Ranking Member John Barrasso of the Senate E&R Committee did agree to push an amendment during those negotiations on ARPA. But they didn't want to give money just to Idaho or Oregon, but wanted to include more broadly in that debate additional funding for Western states, recognizing specifically Western states who were experiencing declining coal revenues. So Senator John Barrasso in particular was the senator who actually pushed for the tribal inclusion in the amendment, which ultimately resulted in the $500 million set aside. And in that process, because of the way that the Senate parliamentarian allows or not allows amendments to be added during budget reconciliation negotiations, which typically they do not allow amendments or language to be too prescriptive, they were allowed to add language, which is now known as this Section 605 Local Assistance and Tribal Consistency Fund. I sent over a second email to Mr. Rico outlining some of the additional background associated with this Tribal Economic Stabilization Fund, and specific letters from Senator Mark Kelly as well on how he is requesting the Treasury Department to seek further consultation with the Treasury Department on how to allocate $500 million in funding in the coming 2 years. I've also sent some of the additional supporting documents that will support some additional background of this particular fund. So Mr. Chairman and members of the 24th Council, and my only last comment that I would make is not to lose focus of all the other provisions that were included in the American Rescue Plan Act, but in particular this $500 million Section 605 fund is $500 million of fund that we should not lose focus of, especially as the intention of the fund would be a good argument for the Navajo Nation in particular to work with in consultation with the Treasury Department and justify our job loss, revenue loss directly associated with the closure of NGS and the Kanta mine. That was and is mainly the intention of this particular fund. So if there's any further details, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay.
Thank you very much, Honorable Carla Abigay, for that information. With that, let me go on down to Miss Sandy Lewis. Miss Lewis, are you on the line? If you have anything else to add further, the floor is yours at this time. Miss Sandy Lewis. Miss Sandy Lewis, are you on the line? Miss Sandy Lewis going twice.
Speaker.
Sandy Lewis going 3 times. That, colleagues, someone said speaker.
Speaker, this was Delegate Begay.
Yes.
Voice that is
Honorable Elmer Brigade, could you state that again?
I just wanted to know if we were voting.
No, we're not taking any action. This is a work session. I was just calling to see if Sandy Lewis was on the line to see if she's going to give a further information or presentation, but it seems like she's not on the line. So I'm going to go to the floor right now. If there's anybody that has any questions for both Holland Knight or Mr. Carlisle Begay, and the only individual right now that we have in the queue is Honorable Otto So. So Honorable Otto So, I can go to you.
Sure, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members of the Naabik'íyáti Committee and Holland and Knight for your report. Mr. Senator Begay, thank you for presenting your input pertaining to the ARP and the work you're doing with the Navajo Nation Council. Individuals on the line and the leadership of the Navajo Nation. One area that really, I guess this is Holland and Knight, and it's relating to the dollars that are being going to be distributed and brought down into the pipeline back to the nation. But what I'm getting to is that I guess the reflection of the recovery and as the guidelines are released, and we have many employees who were working during the pandemic and that didn't get any sort of compensation for their additional work, especially like our employees such as working for the Women, Infant, and Children program. And we know that they continue to provide services out to individuals who were applying for the services during the pandemic. But overall, I guess that fine line, we really need to get, I guess, the guidance on that so that we can provide the proper guidance to our employees, because we did indicate that a retro payment can go back to a person who has been working during the directly to the pandemic case, the pandemic issue at the front lines, our social workers and our EMS, our police officers, and so forth. Sure, a lot of them didn't get any sort of compensation for their time providing services to the nation. So if we could, I guess, expand on that, providing that information would be little bit. It would be good to us. The other is that we have chapters out there that provided a lot of services out there. The chapter staff and even our chapter officials. And I'm really hoping that we could really include our chapter officials into this round of payment, because these chapter officials were actually providing services, direct service directly to the virus, delivering food and the distribution program and the many hours that they put in. And, our chapter officials, I think we really need to look out for them. The other is that, we know that they have expended resources, Navajo tribal resources pertaining to COVID. And a lot of our chapters didn't get a lot of their reimbursements. And, like for me, my chapter provided the tent for the Tuba City Healthcare Corporation and the Western Agency distribution program for the Western Agency chapters. They forked out the cost, and I don't think there's had been a reimbursement to the chapter for covering those costs, because those tent reimbursements are relating to the COVID testing, and even I think the tents are still up, and some are providing the vaccination drive there. So drive-through vaccination. So things like that are there, and I guess the some sort of I guess more clarification, breaking it down to down to nitty-gritty is something that we really need. I know we have Department of Justice on the line, and we know that you are a contractor to the Navajo Nation through the Department of Justice, but I guess a lot of those issues are probably needed, and and then you talk about the population formula, that the 65-35 population ratio and the employment ratio, and out of it, do we have a ballpark figure of what is destined to come to the nation in the 19 million? We know that looking at June 7th is a deadline set to request for those funds, and then we know the 1 billion will be equally distributed to the 574 recognized federal tribes. So we will that's understandable. But I guess the 19 million is something that 19 billion. I'm sorry, is something that we are. I am looking at to see what is destined for Navajo, so that we could get on the plan and get on talk, so that we could try to get these dollars. Because as you're alluding to, in June this year will be the midterm reporting of probably the first phase of the expenditure of these funds, and just off of that. And then the other is that, as our contract attorney and former or Senator Carl Albert alluded to, 71 million being appropriated to the schools of the BIE schools that we have on Navajo, pertaining to whether they are grant schools or BIE schools. And then we have the NHA, and how can we try to allow that guidance over there, so that we could tap into a lot of these funds that are destined to come into this part of the region, so that we could try to impact and improve our Navajo people's livelihood for the recovery of COVID. COVID has affected every family. I lost a family member, and it affected his home life, his family, his livelihood, and it affected every person's livelihood. Today, to conduct business, to conduct just the basic things that we need to do in today's world, we have to be careful. Every day we're on the defense. Even though the federal government has lifted the restrictions of, lifted the mask requirement, but some of us continue to practice these safe behaviors, so that we try to, we don't want to harm any other people out there, because when COVID knocks on your door and affects your home life, whether it's a loved one that you lost out there, people that are listening, it affected you. And today, it's affecting leaders, and it makes you rethink back to, these positions that we're in, and the decisions that we make as leaders of the nation. How can we move forward to try to improve the livelihood of our people that are out there, and try to protect them using these funds? And those are just my general questions and my comments. And again, I really appreciate this report. And lastly is the 605 section on Senator Begay, relating to the timber and the declining coal royalties. I believe we need to have a discussion pertaining to that, because the Navajo Nation, where we're in the exit of coal, and it really impact many lives out there. People who were directly affected are miners, our union workers, all trades up there, millwrights, the carpenters, the laborers, the welders, the truck drivers, the operators, the technicians out there providing the technical data and aspects of mining, our engineers out there that and all of this Navajo people that work there, they're gone. They're finding work elsewhere off the reservation, and every day they're fighting the COVID issue. I have a welder that used to work at the mine, and he's trying to find a job in Phoenix. And with COVID, it just made him sit home. And I really hope that there's our tradesmen out there that is out there working, that finds these jobs, because you look at the commercials that President Biden made, calling out all union workers, all construction workers, bridge workers. I saw that ad, and I really hope that they really have those trades in their minds and their hearts, so that we could try to get them back to work, because they left the nation, and they're out there trying to fend for themselves and trying to be safe at this time and environment. And again, I appreciate the presentation, and I really appreciate this time, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to go back on mute. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Otto So, and for those questions, comments. I'll go to Honorable Eugene So, at this time. And then I'll go on from there. Honorable Eugene So, the floor is yours at this time.
Karabagi, that is all I don't know how you fluent you are in Navajo, but I usually say all my whatever I'm going to say in Navajo. But regards to the section that you're coding, I think like my mother just said that I think we need that needs to be stressed to us or in the different meetings where we can only talk about that section 605 the Ninigi see how it would work, how we can magnify and put some stuff on the ground with it. To see what language it has, what words needs to be seen on that legislation or that amendment of 605. So that way we will really know what's going on with our legal counsel, and we can really stress how we can get some funds out of it. It's really needed. It's really, I guess, it's critical that we really look into that. With maybe somehow you can just for that work session with us and see what we can get out of it. If it's need be, you see, I want to stress that more. That's been said by Chanel Auto. So yes, we do. We did. But I do commend and like do some first responders that we overlook. Seems like, along with the CARES Act, we had over I think it was 24,000 that recovered. And who's the responsible for that? I would say 29,000 as yesterday. I think it was 329 recoveries. And the responsible people for that is the first responders. ARCA, we need to magnify it and help them out with others. Maybe we can get ready to really put some funds up there for anything that we have left with COVID-19. So with that funds, we need to really stress those people that were in the front line. They need to be commended. They need to be awarded of some way. We have, I know we have a lot that died, over 1,200, almost 1,300 people. That's a lot of Navajos. Yep, a lot of tears, I guess. A lot of tears to to make some rivers on the Navajo Nation. Now, even today, but we thank these people that were in the front line. I don't know how, if we can get some funds somehow regards to that, the funds that's coming down. I would really be appreciative to help these people. So like I said, over 29,000 recovered, and those are the people that did it, that helped them along and gave them this and that, what they need to fight it, and fought their way out of it. Because we don't know what the unforeseen going to give us in the future again. So right now, there's a lot of things that we need to look at, like regards to infrastructure. It seems that that's going to be language that we need to, it needs to be really identified. Regards to the communication out here on the Navajo Nation, we do really need some broadband, etc. And we do need roads, and we do need water. We don't have water for a lot of people out here. I think they say 40% of people don't have running water. That includes me. So, also the electricity. for that, Eki. We really need to connect the people on the Navajo Nation so they be connected with the outside world, so we can educate our younger generation with those broadband. They need to be up front with them. Because you cheated in the street, they kind of got behind. And this last year, this year is going to be remembered because of our younger generation missed out on a lot of classes. And we hope they don't have to return to the same grade this fall. So those are some issues that we have. So going to just see what we can see in that 605. I would request that we look at that in a separate a work session with the Nabi. Kind of ask for it. If it's feasible, if it's good, we do need it, because if that fund's going to be coming down to the tribes, I think we need to look at it and see how much we can get out of it. Mr. Damon, thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Eugene. So with that, colleagues, let me go ahead and continue on down in the queue. I have Honorable Nathaniel Brown next, and then I'll go back to the presenters if there's any response. Honorable Brown, floor is yours.
Ayate, Speaker, did you call me?
Yes.
Ayate, Delegate, Speaker, Chairman Seth Damon, the 24th Navajo Nation Council, Ado Anas Hoda Sinas Agishik Ada Shidne, Shea Tobahanshlo, look up Bashin, Kia Ani Bashiche, Adok is a Sandationala. Ado, thank you to the presenters for all the information that you have shared. And I know that there's a lot of information here. Trying to jot down all my questions here. But one of the first questions I have is on the $20 million language initiative. If you can send me, Mr. Carlisle Begay, as much information as possible on language. What is it? Are there any specific guidelines? What is the funding? How do they want us to spend funding the ARPA funds, specifically the $20 million? And I would need, is there technical assistance on how we should apply? Is it just proposal forms, etc.? I've been meeting with, this morning, I was in the Diné Language Teachers Institute meeting. A lot of really good information, a lot of good work that's being done. And we also had our Diné Bezat subcommittee of the Naabik'íyáti meeting this last week on Friday. So we did receive a report from Dodie from OzCAD, and asking them to get their information ready, their data on language and all the projects that encompass our Navajo language. The other thing would be, I know the last time, I think we're in so many meetings, but were we also waiting for Dr. Shabala? Was it in this meeting or another meeting? I'm looking at my notes here. But the other thing would be, I know you gave us the figures from the different states, how much funding they're receiving. But if you could also share the state of Colorado. I know when we visited the Wolf Creek Ranch, we had a 2-day meeting session up there where we received a wealth of information, including we did see the land where the cows are at, and there's drought also. So the Navajo Nation and the ranch there is set number 2 in the water rights. However, sometimes they run out of water. So there is a major drought issue in one of the ranches. And can the ranch apply for funding? And it's 2 parts to that. There is the drought part, and then the other part is the calves and also the bison were directly impacted because slaughterhouses were not, they were also quarantined, etc., and adhering to CDC guidelines. So we do have some revenue loss in that area as well. So how can we address that? I guess it would be the state of Colorado, and then it would be the ARPA funds from the Navajo Nation. Let me see, general information. And I'm really interested that if there's 65% or of the $20 billion that are going to tribe, are they really looking at the other tribes who, I think it is Cherokee tribe, who have almost about the same numbers as Navajo. So would they be eligible for almost the same amount in that area of the guideline, how much they're receiving? Let me see, re-enrollment IDs. The other question would be housing. I know that NXA is receiving funds, but I know there's organizations and chapters, 501c3 that are led by our own people, nonprofits and for-profit organizations. I did hear in this presentation that it could be given up as grants, but if you can share that information as well, especially in where I know that there are tribes. I know that there's our enterprises of the Navajo Nation, and including Navajo businesses that apply for grants with their proposals, and there is usually a matching fund that is required. So is that something that we would have to show for other enterprises as far as matching funds? So, or can they be just given out as, I think it's just grant-based. So, and let me see. And the other thing was for the Kayenta Township. I know there's 110 chapters, and Kayenta Township, it is within the jurisdiction of the Kayenta chapter boundaries. So the township has 10 miles within the boundaries, and they collect taxes. However, during the pandemic specifically, the township, they had a huge revenue loss with the business closures, with the president closing with executive order, shutting down the nation to where, our hotel, our restaurants were, and then also gas stations were closed. So we do see a direct impact and revenue loss in that. So with Kayenta Township, I know there's always a question of, well, there is Kayenta chapter. If you can look on what that would look like, and how can we be fair? Maybe, I know that Kayenta Township has prepared their document, their data on the revenue loss, so we can also show that to make sure that they do receive the reimbursements. I know that retro payments was also mentioned in this presentation. And again, would that be just to the March 2019? How far back can that go? Because Mr. Bigay, you did mention in your presentation just a while ago that with the closure of NGS, Navajo Generating Station, and also Kayenta Peabody Mine, how much of the funding are they still eligible? I know that the closure did happen before the pandemic, so would they still be eligible? I know that the impact is still, and we are seeing the impacts in my communities and in the surrounding communities that are off the nation also. And what would be, how would they be decided on how much money they would be receiving? That's what I'm interested in. So those are my questions right now. I know I had other questions. I'm trying to look for them. I typed them up on one of my computers here. So I know that. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Brown. With that, let me go ahead and go back to the sponsor. Any clarity, or actually not the sponsor, the presenter. Yeah, if there's any response to any of the questions. Holland Knight or Mr. Naabik'íyáti, at this time, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Speaker Damon. So I would agree with comments that from many leaders and from Mr. Begay that we were here presenting about the fiscal recovery funds, which was the $20 billion. But the American Rescue Plan as a whole represents a lot of opportunities for the tribe. The consistency fund that Mr. Begay mentioned is certainly one of them. There is also a capital projects fund. There is also a homeowners assistance fund. There is also funds for language and other things. And we need to strategize, I think, on how to leverage absolutely all dollars that we can through the American Rescue Plan. So absolutely that this is a big, as we say, once in a lifetime opportunity for the nation. And the fiscal recovery fund that Ken and I were discussing is just one component of all of it, a significant component, but still. The other thing I would say is that, even with all of this, the difficult part will be prioritizing and also matching need to the appropriate place in the American Rescue Plan. So I think it's there. We just have to keep working to make sure we identify need and make sure the appropriate area of money, and that we're being consistent with the law. And that's all really I wanted to say, to really emphasize that what we were talking about today is just one small piece of the puzzle.
And just to add on to that, I don't know, we'll be able to get to everybody's questions. I was taking some notes, but I wanted to point out with the premium pay, I think there was a question about how far retroactive it could go. As I mentioned during the presentation, that's the only piece, at least according to Treasury right now in its guidance, of the FRF that can go retroactive. And I think that I would interpret that as being them dealing with COVID, like how long have they been dealing with COVID physically, meeting with people, things like that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who's working in a hospital or in Health and Human Services. I think somebody mentioned potential people that like possibly chapter officials or employees of children's programs. Again, I can't say specifically whether these people are included, but I did want to point out that in Treasury's guidance, it leaves a lot of discretion to the tribal government to determine who is performing critical services for the government. And are these people the types of people that are physically present in an office, or are they going to see people? Are they in contact with people? Basically, are they exposed to COVID-19? And I think that that's what the gist of Treasury's guidance is on that point. So I would definitely look to that. And we can also follow up later or go into some other session to get into more details on some of these things. Somebody had also asked about a ballpark figure. I don't know the answer to how much the tribe will be getting, but I do know that it's going to come soon. So the date that June 7th, that was actually for the second tranche, the second allocation. The first allocation, the one with respect to enrollment, is actually going to come out later this month and pretty soon on that. I mean, it could be within the week or so. And that's going to be the big chunk because it's going to be the 65% enrollment allocation in addition to the $1 billion that's being divided equally. So although we don't know the answer, we will know soon. The other general point I would make about that is if you know what the nation received last year in CARES Act money, we know that the Fiscal Recovery Fund is more than double the CARES Act money, 8 billion versus 20 billion. So doubling whatever you received last year, I think would be a good proxy as a starting point. So I'll stop there and pause and see if anybody has other responses.
I think the only thing I would add, good afternoon again, this is Carlisle. I think a great point on the first tranche or the first distribution of payment. Just again, a reminder that the enrollment data, the certification of enrollment data is due next week. in the discussions or informational sessions, the Treasury did indicate it will take them 4 to 5 days to process and verify that information submitted by tribes. So we could expect that sometimes this week, I'm sure that the Office of President and Vice President will submit that information to Treasury in their online portal. And rule of thumb, they had indicated it was 4 to 5 days for them to process and distribute that fund, which again, I think is double of what we received from CARES seems to be what other tribes are indicating as a rule of thumb. So I would probably venture to say that well over 1.4 billion is what the nation is likely to receive in this first payment. On the point regarding the Section 605 Travel Consistency Fund, my reason and rationale for pointing this out in the discussion today, I know much of it is focused on the Fiscal Recovery Fund. 20 billion is a focus, but my point is that Treasury is actively having discussions with members of Congress right now, in addition to larger associations of counties, and they are tasked with deciding how to equitably distribute this fund, $500 million, over the next 2 years, and understanding from certain offices that that fund will be distributed based on a formula that I think would be really good to get into meeting with the Treasury Department and officials now than later, ensuring that the recommendations that we have regarding the formula is taken into consideration earlier on in these discussions rather than later. But that's a big pot of money, as Delegate Brown had indicated. The intent of this fund was to focus on areas in the country that we're experiencing difficulty in stabilizing budgets, and economies of areas that have historically hosted extractive industries, like the Navajo Nation, which we were dependent on our coal revenue for a couple of decades, and that's the intention of this fund. And I think we have a really good argument to the Treasury Department on how this fund would directly benefit the Navajo Nation.
Thank you very much, Honorable Carl Brigade, for that response. Thank you again to Holland Knight too as well. Now, let me go back to the floor. I have Honorable Keon Brigade next in the queue, then Honorable Slater. So, Jay, good afternoon. Floor is yours, Honorable Keon Brigade.
Yeah, this is Jay. You hear me, right? Okay.
Yes.
Yes, here Nando de Kudo, Shanat Anito Ado, Dichenam, Chen Ando Picture, Quaga Leba Yananil. Kudo presenter, so Mr. Carl Brigade, Ado Holland and Knights. Good afternoon. I forwarded an email that I sent over back on March 29th for continents, and there's several areas that I've asked questions, and as of today, have not received anything or any response, and which I would assume that would have answered some of the questions being posed by my colleagues. Again, this is always the case. You send statement, you send anything in writing, and usually it ends up, I guess, nowhere. So, but I just want to be on record that I have been posing questions to visitors with no response or no update. But I guess, as you know, we have 110 chapters, and we'll be pushing, and I'll be pushing to say that they should be the first in line to make any recommendation of any funding that's coming forth again through APRA. So what I'm trying to make clear that they're allowable to do is what federal policy or what the Navajo Nation needs to deal with the Treasury Department to allow all 110 chapters will be able to have certain direct funding coming to their local government, rather than having a lot of these funding being managed directly at Windrut level. As you know, that if it wasn't for the hardship, I believe that 330 plus million would have just gone back to the federal government. So that's how much funding that was not allocated, and that's the amount of funding that was redirected to the hardship, because a lot of our those entities that had received these funding didn't have sufficient time to complete these projects. So I believe that any funding directly to the chapter would help the central government get these funding be spent at the local level, working directly with whatever source or whatever that's allowable under the guideline, that they will be able to help the nation spend these funding. So again, maybe verbally now, and I did say that when I made presentation to you all back in the first time that you've made a presentation, that these will be some of the things that I'll be asking, and which I put them. I think there was 6 or 7 of them that's outlined in my memo, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to respond back. Otherwise, I'm not sure what else I would need to do or ask if that particular statement will be answered. And the reason being is that a lot of these questions are asked or posed by our local chapter officials in seeing how they could be able to help themselves in getting some of these funding. So, maybe you can help me. I forward the memo or the statement to you that I've addressed directly to the Holland and Knights. Maybe you can go ahead and forward that email to them and see when and how long they could be able to respond back, and I can share that with my colleague and then my local chapter officials. Akoko awatashnan ano kliniki koto ya bahasi kit that the chapter has on the Kwigushina itaship. Dim that Treasury Department that base of the hidden dekoko. A lot of times these guideline is composed or developed with the situation in the metropolitan area, and not necessarily rural or especially Indian country. It's what we always say at DC level. Indian country are not developed to address a lot of these local situations. So the main thing that I'm advocating for are people that are self-employed. People do their business with livestock ranching, and not necessarily that it's viewed by support by the Navajo, by the federal government, such as pottery maker, such as rug weavers or vendors. I believe that the majority of our Navajo people composes of that sector, and that's how they make their living on the Navajo Nation. So how they were affected by this COVID-19 is usually overlooked, and it has overlooked. And how do we change that? And how do we address that? And how do we help these people? So a quack eating hit net or hayoy. Allah one has odd that said that I think in that the kite the better the shinsa. Yek in the kite the door believe that the whole baker she ranching not. It I see to Yego Joban Sakista. din latte US Treasury Department need that the peso bent on the stone the dot as in latte kin hatas a hot a hit a big be hatet a ko an hi ko jina be ko be kaya pa khas age nil hot a gito a do hit an hi in linigi the culture and tradition linigi to yegon hapa ko hin sno o khayudi based on linigi to need age ko don hit nan linigi be kha to was out be has an hatet a kot ato jo based on hit ko net tan hit a le jo kwa ke na hapa ko hin sun ko la hit a in the Treasury Department linigi but on to last in the chapter do the chapter has the sato ayen do le shope be hot or la hot or nis jo hot ala e ba po net sagan so ban saskis kodosh ne shik e no linigi do shinant no linigi. So that's one area that I'll continue to focus on, making sure that our 110 chapters will be receiving sufficient funding for their local projects, because all this time I'm sure you are taking part or observing that the Navajo Nation Council have been receiving reports from these divisions from the executive branch that they're asking for billions and billions of dollars. But a lot of time, majority of our local chapter issues are overlooked or not even part of the of their plan. I specifically say that through the Division of Natural Resource proposal of $105 million, and that 5 of my chapters are not even mentioned in there, but yet they're asking for $553 million. So those are some areas I think that they could let them have funding, but what is being left out, could the local chapter be able to manage to continue to develop their only local projects. Each 110 chapters develop a community land use plan. And as an RDC member, we certify them and let them know that, they let us know and how the reason why we certify them, they have a specific plan within each of their community. So what's the purpose of certifying a community land use plan, but yet we don't appropriate any funding for them to develop these plans that they have implemented, which are supported by the local chapter, the community members, and so on. So what that age shin koto and hit nado and chapters and denigi be papa khunits and do lesson no denigi according ego go night kito lesto maybe once again speaker staff Mr. Begay, if you could be able to forward my statement that I've developed on March 29th to be forwarded to the Holland and Knights and see if they'd be able to get a written response. So yeah, and Hidini the speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, let me go ahead and go on down to Honorable Slater. Honorable Slater.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the presenters. My question is with respect to the calculations on revenue loss and how or what any guidance was provided there. Does that apply to all entities that are controlled by the nation? And I mean, is there guidance on the calculations right now and how that can be made? I mean, there's a lot of arguments that can be made broadly about revenue decline, and so what would be like the start date for calculating that, if there is guidance on that? And then when you put in, say, ARPA funding to make up for revenue declines, then does it have to be equal to whatever the decline was? And I guess what sort of causation needs to be provided? Or is it broader in that you can apply the justification but input more funding to say than was declined, or what the decline was? I feel like I'm not being clear here, and if you need me to follow up, I'm happy to do so. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Slater. That, colleagues, is there any further comments or questions at this time? I don't have anybody else.
Speaker, I apologize. Sorry.
Yes. Honorable Eugene So, then Honorable Slater, I can come back. Honorable Slater, do you have a follow-up?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask real quickly, the category where it goes to government operations, and can we get a little bit more elaboration there? And if there is indications on where there might be difficulty, I shouldn't say difficulty, but can you just elaborate further on the government operation side? It sounds like that's going to have the broadest, say, usage or applicability, or where we can try to have the broadest set of programs. And if you could speak to that with respect to housing. And, I think a big interest of this council is trying to increase the housing capacity and the housing stock on the Navajo Nation. And if you can contemplate how we can do that, either under that particular provision or other aspects of the law right now. Thank you, Speaker, for allowing the follow-up.
Thank you. Honorable Eugene So, did you have a follow-up too as well?
Just a little, I don't know if they understood what I really mean by what I said. I'm just going to give you an example. When the government gives you money for a jacket to wear in the winter, they'll buy you one, but you have to wear it in June and July or in August. That's how the funds are. That regards to legislations, the wording, how it describes how you're going to use that money, the stipulation. And that's what I really want to know, because some funds come down from Congress, but I don't really coincide with the way we live here on the Navajo Nation, how we can use it. So that's the part that's always lacking, because I don't think they ever know what the dirt world looks like. So those needs to be defined, whatever is coming down. That's the reason why I asked Carla if we could look at those, whatever is on that, how we're going to use stipulation the funds, so we can put something on the ground with it, instead of just look at it and say this is a problem right here, and this language is a problem here. So those are some issues that I have always. Thank you, Chair Speaker.
Thank you. With that, let me go back to the presenters, and then if there's any further comments or in regards to some of the questions. So Holland Knight, and then Honorable Carla Albigay.
Sure. Thank you for those comments. I'm going to try to clarify. We did do that very quickly, and so I apologize if we were not being clear. You're correct, Honorable Slater, that the government services / decline in revenue is a huge catch-all bucket. And yes, Treasury does provide a mathematical calculation for how that can be done. And it allows you to do that calculation at several points. So sitting here today, if we had the data, we could calculate that for 2020. And it compares, as Ken described, pre-pandemic to what you're currently seeing, and it includes also a growth factor. So that's a very favorable. Once you know that amount, then the Treasury guidance basically says government service can include, but is not limited to. And it includes infrastructure, roads, modernization of cybersecurity, hardware, software, environmental remediation, school or educational services, police, fire, and other public safety. So once you know that those are government service, once you know that there's been the reduction in revenue in X dollars, the tribe really has great authority to use those to different things that it wishes to prioritize. To that end, also to answer your question, it says that the definition does include revenue from tribal enterprises. And there's a presumption that that decline is due to COVID, even if they were external. It says for administrative reasons, we're going to assume, because it would be very hard to say, oh, this was caused of COVID, this was other economic decline. It allows you to make that presumption that that decline is because of COVID. So again, another favorable rule. As to housing, yes, I think it probably fits in this bucket, but I wanted to let you know that also in the interim final rule, it talks about housing quite a bit, and it might be that it also fits in another category. And we want to make sure that if it fits in that other category, in my mind, we want to say, okay, let's prioritize it in that other category, because we'll use revenue reduction for everything else that doesn't fit in the other areas. But yes, housing is absolutely contemplated. And we also have a good idea from the interim final rule. We didn't put the mathematical calculation up there, but we have a good idea of how that's done. Ken, what did I miss? I'm sorry.
No, that was great. Thank you. Yeah, just to add on, it's really, really broad what you can do in the government services category. And the guidance specifically says that the statute provides recipients with broad latitude to use fiscal recovery funds for the provision of government services. So even the items that Nicole mentioned from the guidance, it's not an exhaustive list. You could use it for other things as well. But because it's the catch-all category, it's the one that we want to use when something doesn't fit another category. So for example, just to give you an easy example, if you're doing water infrastructure, you wouldn't want to use the government services category for that, because that's clearly covered in another part of the FRF guidance, specifically with broadband, sewer, and water infrastructure, because we're going to come up with this calculation for lost revenue. And it's going to be a big number, I assume, because we're comparing pre-COVID to post-COVID, but the need is always going to outweigh the funds that are available, unfortunately. So we need to be careful what we allocate to this particular category, because at some point it's going to be exhausted. So for example, like Nicole mentioned, there are other places that mention housing, and in particular, the first one I talked about with the COVID-19 response, not only can you provide assistance to households just in the general case that applies to everybody, it specifically talks about tribes being able to provide housing assistance as an additional benefit. So I would definitely look at that category. So there's a lot of flexibility here. The other thing I wanted to mention, just in response to Delegate McGay, we didn't receive any of the comments that you sent previously. So that's why you didn't get a response. We never got anything. I checked my emails while you were talking, and neither of us got anything. So I don't know what happened there, but if you do have questions, I think the reach out is supposed to be to DOJ, just for client confidentiality reasons. So reach out to DOJ and they can direct things to us and we can answer them as needed going forward. There's going to be a lot of questions going forward with this, even as Treasury issues guidance, more questions are going to arise. But generally, there's going to be a lot of flexibility, and I think the questions are really going to be about not whether we can do this, but how do we prioritize what we can do, because there's so much that you can do. Thank you.
And Speaker, this is Carlisle. I think the only thing I would add, just in terms of perspective, and Hall and I did a great job of giving perspective in terms of the guidance that Treasury had issued, but the guidance that Treasury had announced last Monday, the interim rule was 151 pages long. And the comparison, when the CARES Act Relief Fund initial guidance was released, that it was only 3 pages long. So in the last round, there no doubt was a lot of confusion. The new guidance tied to the Fiscal Recovery Fund is far more broad in terms of eligible use. Probably not enough time here today to go through every potential project or use, but the Treasury did do a good job of giving us much perspective and guidance of what's eligible, what's not. But I'm sure that they'd be responsive to additional consultations that Navajo Nation request or questions that we ask directly.
Speaker, this is Delegate Cruddy. I hope that I'm on the list to ask a question. Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair, you are on the list, and I have yourself and Honorable Otto So in the queue at this time.
Can you put
Honorable,
Freeland in there?
Carlisle Begay, do you have anything else to add?
No, Speaker.
Okay, with that, Madam Chair, this is the queue. Madam Chair Amber Crotty, then Honorable Otto So, then Honorable Mark Freeland. Honorable Madam Chair Amber Crotty, good afternoon. The floor is yours.
Oh yeah, Speaker, thank you. Thank you, colleagues, Holland and Knight, for your presentation, and Senator Begay for assisting. I'm looking, and I appreciate the presentation and the high-level summary. I'm looking at the facts. So actually, I want to be clear here. So DOJ has determined what part of this presentation is attorney-client privilege. I just need to know the parameters there. And so am I able to ask questions regarding on some of the documents that we received? If I could get that clarification first, Speaker, and then I have a few questions to ask.
Thank you very much. I think Mr. Mel Rodas was on earlier to clarify some of that. Mr. Rodas?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Honorable Crotty. When I sent the email this morning at 8 a.m. that included that statement, I was just respectfully requesting that that the presentation not be forwarded. And so, but I did think that it was appropriate to display it on the screen today. And so feel free to ask any questions, ma'am. And then if there's something that needs to be followed up with at a later date, we can do so, either in writing or in a conversation with you. But feel free to ask any questions, ma'am. Thank you.
With that, Madam Chair, Amber Crotty, let me go back to you. Madam Chair, Amber Crotty? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Speaker. So I'm going to look at frequently asked questions, page 2, number 4. It does have a timeline for May 24th. What I just want to be clear in terms of what are the requirements for this request? Was it just a certification of our population? I just need to make sure if I could get an update on where we're at for that May 24th request. Also, in terms of the frequently asked questions, I'm going to refer to page 4, the first bullet point, where it talks about, I'm sorry, not page 4. I'm going to go to, oh, here it is. Page 6, the first bullet point in terms of building stronger neighborhoods and communities. I appreciate Vice Chair Slater's question regarding housing. I just need clarification for the Navajo Nation. So do we expect additional federal or additional relief that that's beyond what was allocated to our Navajo Housing Authority as the tribal designated housing entity? I also then wanted to ask a question in terms of the disparities, the educational disparities. So for Navajo Nation and the way that our education is set up, we do have some direct authority under certain educational activities, like for example, Head Start, and some of our childcare centers. What is the recommendation on how to work with the state school districts or some of the private parochial districts that we have here on the nation? And as we look at promoting healthy childhood environments, when we talk about programs for families, and this is along the similar line, are we just thinking, or is this just for Navajo Nation programs? Our Navajo Nation, like social services, they offer 638 funding to like our local shelters and other programs. So I just want to be clear in terms of some of these nuance. I understand there's a lot of flexibility, but as we're pulling together this information and receiving what has been, the revenue impacts, how were some of these services altered because the shelters had to limit their services and may have had to do like hotel stipends, or families. What I thought was very interesting is the assistance of relocating to neighborhoods with higher levels of economic opportunity. If I don't know if that's a too specific question, but I would like to know, what is that parameter? And are then we talking about neighborhoods, then would that be considered off the Navajo Nation? If you could give me a little bit more information about that, or where I could look to that, or if there's an upcoming webinar. I think those are areas that I'm really honing in on so that we can provide some relief to our families who are looking for immediate relief, especially when it comes to overhousing, or they've been stuck in a violent situation during this lockdown. And I do see on page 7, Speaker and my colleagues, on number 20 is the formulation for calculating the reduction in revenue. If I could just get an insight on what entity, if you do know, what entity for the Navajo Nation will be responsible for calculating this revenue. I'm not exactly sure if there's a team, or if Chair Henyo can give us guidance on budget and finance, how we should be monitoring or engaged in those conversations when it comes to developing this number and all of the different metrics that are going, or that will be included. So thank you very much for this high level summary. We know it's a lot of moving pieces. We know there's a lot of concerns. I think right now I'm just trying to grasp how we can maximize not only the funding Navajo Nation is receiving, but in working with our federal, state, and county partners, and what are going to be the expectations, and how we could either do some cost sharing so that Navajo Nation does not have to just do the full burden, because we have more than we have over $4 billion of projects that need to immediate projects. And so I just thank you for this information. Speaker, colleagues, thank you.
Thank you. That Honorable Otto So, floor is yours for follow-up. Can you hear me? We're still on mute.
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, Speaker, can you hear me? What's my
yes,
side?
I can hear you now.
Okay. One of the follow-up question is, this is the Department of Justice. I guess the certification of the tribal enrollment that's due to the Treasury, since it's a government position of the Navajo Nation, does it, and this is the Department of Justice, does it require the Navajo Nation Council to ratify that through a form of a resolution? The other is to Holiday Night. I guess expanding on the livelihood here on Navajo. A lot of our Navajo citizens, they have the ranchers. A lot of them rely on the cattle prices to actually come up in order to sell their livestock. And during the time of COVID, we know that the meat factories were closed, and a lot of the places where our ranchers had to take in their livestock were closed. And because of that, they did reopen, but the cattle price, livestock price has been affected. And some of our ranchers got a low cost of what either a 600-pound steer would cost normally in a normal market. And how does how would this factor in to help our ranchers and our farmers out there that actually farm? Because some of them farm, like plant hay, and they utilize that for their family income, so that they can provide resources to their home in forms of food, to pay bills, and to clothe their children. And it affected many farmers through in that form. And then we have farmers that actually grow food for their own usage, and a lot of them, some did not farm just due to the fact that they're told to stay home and wash your hand, and a lot of them, they're scared to go out to farm. So it really impacted their livelihood. And I guess if you can expand on any type of language or direction that Treasury has given, so that we can, that's geared towards farming and ranching industry. I appreciate the time. Thank you very much. Speaker.
Thank you. With that, let me go on down to Honorable Freeland.
Thank you, Speaker. Sorry, I just muted myself. Thank you, Holiday Night, as well as Senator Brigay. I definitely appreciate my colleague bringing up the ranchers and farmers as well. I appreciate it. I was going to mention that, but he already mentioned it, so thank you, Shana, for mentioning that. My question, I know we're talking about ARP, but I just came from one of my chapters today, and we talked about scenarios. We talked about bringing water to homes. In this chapter, there's 38 homes that don't have any running water, and adjacent to the other chapter across the highway, there is a dire need for water out there as well. So my chapter officials, both my chapter presidents were there today, and they asked, what if we were to drill wells in the area? And because the homes that they need to get to are, of course, sitting on top of a hill, and it's hard to, you can't take water and put water, a water line, have water go up a hill, unless you have a pump station on top. So what if we were to drill wells on top of those hills and have the water come down using gravity, vice versa, to homes down below? Because we are in a scenario where we do have homes on top of, plateaus, and then we have homes within the Chaco Wash and the lower areas. How are we going to address that? So what I had asked about was, or what I wanted to ask about was, I know we're talking about ARP, the White House Infrastructure Plan and the Americans Jobs Act. I know with us New Mexico delegates, we were working with Senator Lujan's office. And in the Americans Job Act, the two big takeaways were Americans' access to clean water. The 38 homes plus all the other homes on the other side, there's no running water. There's no access to clean water. And the other component to that was the infrastructure part, which is the broadband issue. And, you know, for remote and rural areas, how are we going to bring more fiber to those areas? And how are we going to bring more water to those areas? If we can utilize American Jobs Act. I know President Biden right now is dealing, he's trying to sell this to Republicans, and seeing Mitch McConnell's, you know, his usually what he's talking about, his responses are very clear that there's no deal. The Republicans want a different number. But, you know, if this were to pass, the American Job Act were to pass, we could really help out a lot of our people get access to clean water, not only in my area, but all across the Navajo Nation. Think about the potential that we could bring to our people. And, you know, it's going to be a huge undertaking, but I think as delegates, as my colleagues, as leadership, as executive, we really need to prepare for this right now, because it's such a huge opportunity for our people to get running water within their homes, to get bathrooms, to get a commode, to get a sink, to get a sink and get a tub or a shower, a walk-in shower into their homes. And I always see that access to clean water, and every American should have that right. Unfortunately, our Navajo people, we don't have that luxury at this time. A lot of our people don't. So I just wanted to mention that if there was an update on the Jobs Act, if you can provide that. I know we're talking about ARP, but there's this other thing that we need to also
I'm going to
discuss.
email you the ones that I can, though.
Okay.
Speaker, I can hear you. Thanks.
I'm sorry, Honorable Freeland, for interrupting you.
That's okay. And if we could look at the Jobs Act, but how can we also work with the the Interior Department with Secretary Holland? How can we get right-of-ways through BLM? How can we work with the state of New Mexico like we did this morning with the land commissioner to get right-of-ways through access through checkerboard areas and get lay down pipe to our people's homes in Eastern Navajo? So thank you, Speaker.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, let me go back to Holland Knight and then to Honorable Caller Naabik'íyáti for a response. Holland Knight.
Yes, thank you, delegates Crotty, So, and Freeland. Lots of good questions. I may jump around a bit, but I'm going to cover them, and then Nicole can fill in any of the holes, anything I missed. So I wanted to point out that we've got broad latitude with FRF dollars to use, not just for individuals and households, but also affected businesses. So to the extent we're talking about livestock, cattle ranchers, that kind of thing, you know, I see a number of ways to make that work in the law. And again, the overarching thing is we're going to have more need than dollars. So some priorities will have to be made, and that's going to be decisions for the Navajo Nation to make. But under the law, I think that you've got ways to provide assistances to small businesses and to households. And I think that under either of those, one or both, you could probably get to ranchers and farmers, because they've certainly been impacted by the pandemic. And as I was mentioning with Fiscal Recovery Fund, we're really trying to recover from the impacts of the pandemic. So to the extent individuals or businesses have suffered, that's really right in line with what the law is designed to address. Delegate Crotty, I know you had some questions about the May 24th request from Treasury. The information that's necessary for that has actually already been provided to Treasury. The enrollment data was submitted to BIA last month, and it is the updated numbers. So all that has to be done by May 24th is for someone from the nation, and I believe it's Ms. Lewis, going into the system and really requesting the funding. There's really no further submission of information about enrollment. It's already there. The money just has to be requested by May 24th. And once that's done, it just takes about 4 days for Treasury to confirm those numbers, confirm the submission, confirm everything's in order, and then submit the money. So the money could be coming very soon with respect to the first tranche. So you mentioned the education disparities, early, those kind of Head Start programs and all of that are definitely covered. You know, while you were talking about the FAQ and pointing out the specific things, I was looking at the more detailed guidance. I don't know if you looked at the interim rule, but on all of those, there's even more information. And it's a non-exhaustive list. So sometimes if you ask like a very specific question, it's not going to be addressed in the guidance itself. But I would say that if it's pretty similar to what Treasury has discussed in the guidance, you're probably going to be on pretty firm ground with what you're talking about. So I'll stop there, and Nicole, you can fill in the holes that I missed. Thanks.
Thanks, Ken. I think that was all I was going to say.
Yes, Ms. Elliott, continue on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think Ken covered that nicely. So I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Honorable Carlisle Begay. Anything else?
Thank you again, Chairman, and the honorable members of the 24th Navajo Nation Council. I think the only two things I'll add is on the topics of education and housing and the broader consensus that there's going to be money being made available within some of the allowable uses of the fund. I would just reiterate the need that states, our bordering states in Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and Arizona are again receiving their big chunks, and they're meeting with state leaders over the last 2 weeks. They're already inquiring and hearing rumors that the Navajo Nation is expecting another big tranche from the Treasury Department. And an example is some of the transportation projects that we've been advocating for at the state level in Arizona. They're asking, you know, isn't the Navajo Nation going to use some of those funds on some of our requested road projects? And our response is those funds are allocated on a long list of other funding formulas, but there is still a large need. And so my point is that I think there's a lot of benefit from reaching out to our neighbors, especially on the education side, where there's no doubt a lot of money across the board for education, especially for the number of public school districts that are also on the Navajo Nation. With regard to Chairman Mark Freeland's question on the latest on the infrastructure bill through Congress, as you're aware, President Joe Biden did release his outline, which was initially seen as unlikely to pass, but now the prospects of Congress moving on an infrastructure bill package is growing stronger. Today, the Senate Republicans were to outline their revised offer of an infrastructure package with a focus on roads, public transportation, and airports. So that was supposed to go out today. I'm not sure if that's been released, but Senator Shelley Moore Capito is the Senate Republican leading that charge on the Senate side. So I know that President Biden has held a number of meetings with several Republican leaders over the last 2 weeks as a countermeasure. I think that the Senate Republicans are going to release their plan, I think, for a $1.5 trillion package here this week. But as I learn more, Chairman Freeland, I'll send an email with an update. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I agree with everything that's been said. I meant to mention the American Jobs Act, and I apologize. We don't yet, just to be clear, we don't have statutory text, and we don't know what a final agreement will look like. So while I agree this would be another great opportunity that the nation needs to be mindful of, particularly if it, for example, provides dollars for roads, and then we can free up ARP or fiscal recovery fund. It is a little challenging, although we do have more time to plan against that, because we really don't know what will happen in DC.
But one of the things, just to add on to that, is with the new guidance that came out, we knew with the statute that tribes would have until the end of 2024 to use fiscal recovery funds, which was great compared to coronavirus relief funds, where there was this mad dash to spend a lot of money in 6 months, basically, before the deadline was extended. Here, we know from the beginning that we've got almost 3 years, and then the Treasury guidance just came out, which basically gives you until the end of 2026 to spend the fiscal recovery funds. So you've got 2 years more than what we originally thought. So I think that gives some time to the nation, if they want to see how things shake out with some of these other pots of money, to see if infrastructure dollars are coming, maybe before spending the FRF on particular projects. So that has to be balanced against the need, obviously, but just to keep in mind that possibly more money for some of these categories is coming, and we might have a little bit of time to see how that ends up.
Thank you. With that, let me go to Mr. Rodas for a response to Honorable Otto So's question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Honorable Vice Chair So, for the question. The way I understood your question is, does Council or NABI have to approve the proposed submission to Treasury as an adoption of the official position of the nation before the nation can submit anything to Treasury? I hope that I got that correct, sir. And my response would be that the nation isn't adopting a political position here. We're not saying that we support, for example, the American Jobs Act or some other piece of federal or state legislation that's currently pending. So I would say that it's an executive branch function to apply for the funds by making the submission to Treasury, and then it would be Council's authority to appropriate the funds that are received. So, and just to give you an idea of what's being submitted, I'm just going to read off very quickly the submission requirements. So we just have to state the tribe's name, the taxpayer ID number, the DUNS number, the address, the name of our authorized representative, title and email, the contact person, transfer of funds information, in other words, our bank account, our routing number, and then we have to submit the certification document, which in the first submission would just be the application and reference to the self-certified population data that was already submitted to the BIA. And then with the second submission, it would be certifying the tribal employment numbers from 2019. So in that sense, I would say that would be an executive branch function. And my understanding is that that's being coordinated through the Washington office, but I believe Ms. Lewis is on the phone and she can correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rodas. That colleagues.
Speaker.
Yes.
Hey, just check. I'm online. Naabik'íyáti, sir.
Good afternoon, Chairman.
Good afternoon, sir.
With that, colleagues, thank you very much for the response from Mr. Rodas and from the presenters. Colleagues, is there any other further questions at this time? I don't have anybody else in the queue. No one's texted in.
Speaker Kale and follow up.
Yes, Che.
Delegate Daniel So.
Let me go to Honorable Keon Begay, and then after that on to Chairman Daniel. So, Honorable Keon Begay.
Speaker, I believe I I posed several questions, and I don't know if I need to repeat them to get an answer. But I did indicate that some of the questions are in the written format that I sent to in Holland and Knights. So I'm not sure if I was heard or not, Speaker.
All right, thank you. With that, Ms. Elliott or Mr. Parsons, did you receive any email from Honorable Keon Begay?
We did not, Speaker Damon, but we will look out for it and coordinate as appropriate.
Honorable Keon Begay, did you send it directly to Mr. Parsons or Ms. Elliott?
Speaker, I sent it directly to the Department of Justice, Ms. McPaul, the President of the Navajo Nation, and yourself, Speaker.
I haven't looked at my email.
Again, this was back in March 29th.
Speaker, this is Manuel.
Yes.
I forwarded that email to Mr. Rodas. So, as Ms. Barbaroff indicated, that we go to DOJ. Thank you.
Okay. Department of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate Mr. Rico forwarding the email to me this afternoon, and I would like to reach out to Honorable Begay for some clarification on the questions, and then I will coordinate with Holland and Knight on some responses if needed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Begay.
Thank you for that, Mr. Rodas. That we move on down. Chairman Daniel So.
Thank you, Cecilia, Chairman of the NABI Committee, other colleagues on the call, legislative staff, and staff from the Attorney General and other relatives across the Navajo Nation. I just want to express appreciation to Ms. Elliott and Mr. Parsons, and of course, Senator Begay for bringing back the new summary. And I think, and I guess the main thing I want to really get clarified is for the Navajo Nation to basically put together the use of the funds. That is not due on May 24th, or what was the other date, June 7th. And I guess the other aspect is when we are ready to access those funds that are allowable using the guidelines, we can submit those proposals anytime between June of 2021 to September of 2024. Am I correct in what I'm gleaning off of your presentation as far as the usage of the funds? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Daniel. So with that, colleagues, is there any other further questions at this time for Holland and Knight or Honorable Senator Begay? If there are none, let me go back to Holland and Knight or Senator McGee to answer Chairman Daniel So's question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Daniel. So the deadlines that are in the presentation that we gave, May 24th and June 7th, are deadlines just by which the tribe has to provide enrollment. Well, the tribe has to request the funds, and then June 7th is about employment numbers. The Treasury Department does not anticipate or want plans how you will spend the money. They will, after the fact, require reports on how you spent the money. So it is not a process by which you go to Treasury Department and say, I would like to spend it on this, is this okay? But rather, using the guidelines, we work through whether it's an eligible use. And as can be expected, because they are required to do oversight, states, locals, tribes will have to give reports to Treasury periodically on a quarterly basis, anticipated. So I just wanted to be very, very clear. The statute and the guidance, separate and apart, says that this money has to be obligated by the end of 2024. So you've got some time to obligate it, and an additional 2 years to expend that money. So we're looking at a much longer time frame than we were with the CARES Act money to spend and think about how we want to spend this money. I hope that was clear.
Thank you.
Speaker, Cecilia, follow up.
Yes, Chairman Daniel So, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Cecilia. If Miss Elliott, what you just relayed, if we could get it on another slide, in addition to your PowerPoint presentation, that particular item is key because right now everybody's, and I don't mind saying it, everybody's trying to almost get in a fight over how it's going to be distributed. And with this, your answer to my questions, it really clarifies that we have some time to really refine our plans. And it gives us our ability to do some due diligence work, seek out construction engineers to give us a real good estimate of what it would take to get some of our projects built. I appreciate the answer, and if you would follow up with a new slide that summarizes what you just basically answered in my questions, I would really appreciate it. That's real defining. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me go back to Holland tonight for a response.
Chairman Daniel, so we would be happy to put that information in an additional slide to clarify, and I apologize if we were not being clear during our presentation.
Thank you. With that, colleagues, is there any other comments or questions at this time for Holland and Knight or Senator Brigade? Well, if there are none, colleagues, thank you very much to the presenters. Thank you very much to Holland and Knight, Miss Elliott, and Mr. Parsons. Thank you for doing the due diligence in our response to our action request in a little under a week in order for you guys to prepare for today. Also, you as well, Honorable Senator Begay, thank you as well for being a partner as well and moving forward in this and making sure that we're getting as much information. What was dissolved here today and what was presented is highly good information. So we can take that information into consideration in order for us to know that there's more time. And I just learned that there's 2 more years now. That's in order for us to go ahead and execute the long-term project ideas or the long-term effects of us utilizing these funds. But there's still a deadline of the 2024 in order for us to go ahead and make sure that we have a plan in place for these funds. So I appreciate that, and thank you very much for presenting to us and bringing apart that discovery. And if there's any other recommendations, please do not hesitate. Or if there's further updates, maybe what we can do is after the June date that was indicated, we can bring you all back again, and then we can have further guidance from not only your office, Ms. Elliott and Mr. Parsons, but also from Senator Begay too as well. And if there's any other further movement on the Jobs Act or any of the other acts, as you indicated, where we could definitely utilize those funds as a way forward, rather than utilizing some of the dollars that's coming from the ARPA funds, and we could definitely mitigate that and make sure that those dollars we can utilize to our best of our ability. And now that we know too as well how much each one of the states are going to receive, we can definitely look at options on what we're going to do to see if there's any existing options that for matching opportunities or more of project goals that we can meet together with the states and even with the local municipality or county governments. So again, thank you very much for this information. Greatly appreciate that for you guys to present before us. I think that there was a couple of questions in this resolve or in the presentation that were resolved. If there's certain similarities or certain follow-ups that need to be done, we will definitely reach out to you here at the speaker's office just to make sure, Ms. Elliott, Ms. Parsons, or Mr. Parsons, and then if there's anything to you as well, Senator Begay, we can definitely reach out to you as we know you're just a phone call away if there's anything else that needs to be clarified. And I know colleagues that you do have their information, and just as some of you have reached out to them, I think they're more than willing to help assist in clarifying most of this federal description, federal notices from the White House or from the Treasury or from the Department of Interior or any other federal agency. So again, thank you very much for being here with us, and thank you very much for these updates today. So with that, colleagues, let's continue on down. It looks like we're at the end of our session today. Is there any announcements at this time before we close out the work session?
Good, sir. I got to check the meeting. I'll see you later.
We'll see you.
Speaker, Delegate Charles Newman.
Yes, good evening, Madam Chair. The floor is yours.
Speaker, thank you very much. I just want clarification. If we have questions regarding the presentation and also the documents that have been sent to us, I still haven't gone through all of the documents that have been sent. But if I do have questions, just for clarification, I send that to Mel Rodas. Is that correct? So I don't send it directly to Holland and Knight. I send it to Mel Rodas. Is that correct?
Let me go back to Mr. Rodas to explain, and then we can go from there. Mr. Rodas?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Madam Chair. So at the following the very first presentation that that Holland and Knight gave, there was some instruction from OLC, and this is my understanding of it. And if Ms. Bobroff is on the line, I'm hoping that she can clarify. But my understanding is that the question should go to Office of Legislative Counsel, and if needed, Office of Legislative Counsel will refer it to DOJ. And then again, if needed, and it won't always be needed, then DOJ can communicate with Holland and Knight. So that's my understanding. Ms. Bobroff, I don't know if you could provide any clarification if that's correct.
Yes, Speaker, that's not what I was instructed by the Attorney General. Oh, and by the way, this is Ms. Bobroff, Chief Legislative Counsel. The Attorney General who holds the contract, or the Department of Justice who holds the contract with Holland and Knight, the AG instructed me that questions should go to the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice would work with Holland and Knight if necessary to get those answers, and they would always copy me on them. If you recall, we had discussions recently that it is the Department of Justice who bears the responsibility to make the final determinations on eligibility. Thank you, Speaker.
Well, thank you, Ms. Bobroff, for the clarification. I'm sorry that I misunderstood that. So the email address that delegates can use to email DOJ is general@nndoj.org. And then many of those emails will be directed to me. Some will be directed to other attorneys in different units of DOJ, depending on what the nature of the question is. And then if needed, I can reach out to Holland and Knight. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Madam Chair Charles Newton, does that clarify your question?
Lots of confusion, but yeah, I guess my question is, if we're paying Holland and Knight, why can't we just have direct contact with them?
Madam Charles Newton, the Attorney General is funding the contract, and under the contract, as all attorney contracts go, there should be a direct communication with the Attorney General. If she's holding the contract, they will then work with Holland and Knight to ensure the questions is within their scope of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Ms. Barbroff, and for answering that, clarifying. With that, colleagues, is there any other announcements at this time? If there are none, I know, colleagues, tomorrow we do have committee meetings going on. I do believe there's a Budget and Finance Committee meeting. There is going to be a leadership meeting tomorrow morning. Information was sent out. It's going to be an update meeting, and then from there, is going to be a specific meetings on Wednesday committee meetings, and then there's also a Naabik'íyáti committee meeting with presentations from Natani Development Corporation, Navajo Hopi, or I do on the strategic opportunities from internal resources, internal presentation that will be there too as well. Mr. Rico, is there Navajo Hopi? Is it going to be on there too as well? Navajo Hopi, what?
Speaker, yeah, that was added at the request of one of your colleagues, the Navajo Hopi Family COVID-19 Relief Group or Fund.
Okay, all right. All right, so that group will be on there too as well. So that'll be there on Wednesday, and then we do have a Navajo Nation Naabik'íyáti committee meeting on Thursday. And as of right now, Mr. Rico, there is a special request to have a special session this Friday. And how many signatures do we have on that, Mr. Rico?
Currently, there are, I believe, 10 signatures.
Okay. So colleagues, so it seems like there will be a request for a special session. There might be a request for an earlier session too as well. That discussion is still unfolding. There might be legislation further that's being developed, but as of right now, I don't have anything specifically in writing when any legislation will be ready or if that is going to happen. So if anything, there will be a NABI work session on Wednesday, Naabik'íyáti committee on Thursday, and then if we do get 3 more signatures, there will be a special council session on Friday. So again, thank you everyone for being on the line, and a greatly thank to Holland and Knight, Senator Carlisle Begay for the presentation today, and really trying to make sure that members of the Naabik'íyáti committee get the full understanding and get as much information and get their questions asked at this time in order for them and myself to really understand the whole breakdown of what Congress has passed and what these opportunities mean to benefit the Navajo people. So without further ado, there's no other announcements, colleagues. It's 5:03 p.m. now, and we can go ahead and close out this work session. Everyone have a good evening. Safe travels if you're traveling anywhere. Safe travels on your way home, staff members. And thank you everyone for being on the line again today. Kat.
Thank you, Speaker. Bye.
Mike.
Thank you. Oh.
Thanks, Speaker.
All right.